This year, there's been a renewed attention on diversity. Diversity has always been a major issue in the legal profession, but I've been around now 30 years studying this issue, and it tends to ebb and flow. And I think we're now again at a point where it's become a centrally important issue. Several general counsels, including Kim Rivera at HP and the general counsel of Facebook, and several other technology companies have now put a renewed emphasis on achieving diversity, not only in their own institutions, but in the law firms that they work with, and also in educational institutions and in the pipeline as well. Um, Here at the Center on the Legal Profession, we've always been focused on this. As I said, I've been studying this issue for 30 years. But this year, we tried to do a few things to move the debate forward. Unfortunately, debates about diversity tend to get stuck in two ways. First, there isn't a lot of good data, and what data there is often not finely grained enough. So we tend to talk about women or minorities, or sometimes women and minorities. But we know that there are many differences within these groups, and those differences turn out to have a big effect on how particular members within those groups are doing. So this year, we completed a major study on Black Harvard Law School graduates, which we featured in an issue of the practice. And one of the major findings of that study was the difference between the experiences and career outcomes and opportunities of Black male graduates and Black female graduates. And given that Black Harvard Law School graduates should be doing as well or better than Black graduates of almost any other law school simply by virtue of the benefits of going to an elite institution like Harvard, these differences are really quite significant, and they were quite stark. And they were even more stark in many ways than the differences that we had found in a prior study we did of the men and women of Harvard Law School, which we reported on in a prior issue of the practice, and even more stark than some of the findings that we found in the After the JD study, which I've also been centrally involved in, which studies a nationwide sample of lawyers. So this is just one example of many of how once we look more finely grained and more particularly among groups, that we could get important insights. And we're not the only ones doing this. Justice Goodwin Liu, for example, of the California Supreme Court, put together a major important study on Asian American lawyers, which showed some of the important differences between Asian Americans and members of other minority groups, as well as, of course, white lawyers, but also gender differences within the Asian population, and also differences with respect to age and heritage and other issues within the Asian community. The more we look at these more finely grained data, the better chance we have not only of understanding the problem, but also addressing the second way in which diversity debates get stuck, which is they tend to be only about the problems and not about the solutions. And again, we try to address this with another issue of the practice, which was on what our author Paola Cecchi Debeglio calls institutional nudges that can be used to improve outcomes for diverse lawyers. And there she was particularly looking at issues of gender, although she's also looking at issues of race. And she uses big data that is gathered on the careers of all lawyers in an organization. She's mostly been looking at law firms to understand the patterns that might lead to inequality and unequal outcomes over the long term. And then she has designed a series of ways in which the institution can be nudged or pushed slightly, not to change dramatically or not to change everything, but to nudge the organization for better practices, which can then produce better outcomes for the groups that we're targeting. and the Speaker's Corner in that issue, in which the Vice Chair of Paul Weiss talked about some of the issues and the problems and how these kinds of solutions offer real ways in which we can move forward on this issue. But there's one final thing I want to say about diversity, which is yes, we should focus on the work that we need to do, but it's also very important to celebrate the work that's been done and to celebrate the accomplishments and the achievements of those lawyers who come from different backgrounds, who have really achieved remarkable success in the legal profession. And at the Center on the Legal Profession, for the last few years, we've been holding an annual awards dinner in which we try to recognize excellence in the profession. Last year, we dedicated our dinner to celebrating the accomplishments of Black lawyers throughout history. And we did so by honoring some amazing Black lawyers who have accomplished so much over the last several years, including Ken Chenault, the CEO of American Express, Sherilyn Ifill, the Director Counsel of the Legal Defense Fund, Judge Robert Wilkins, a judge on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, who was instrumental in the creation of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where we held the dinner, and we gave our most important award to Vernon Jordan, the legendary Vernon Jordan, who has played such a pivotal role in so much of our history. We did the same thing a few years earlier when we celebrated women lawyers as leaders. The point is, yes, we should focus on the problems, we should focus on the work to be done, but we should also celebrate the achievements that we have had to date, which will give us the strength to take a look at the hard data that we are now beginning to produce in order to do the hard work that remains to be done.